Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Frank Cotto, and I'm a solutions architect with Progress Software, and I cover the Flowmon product portfolio here at Progress. Presenting with me today is our VP of Technology, Pavel Minarik. I'm going to talk to you today about the topics, or rather the optics, provided by Flowmon's network detection and response product called Anomaly Detection System. More specifically, though, the goal of this presentation is to present Flowmon ADS to you from the perspective of a real life use case. I'm going to take you through the various stages of a supply chain compromise attack, and at each stage, we will discuss how Flowmon ADS or Anomaly Detection System identifies these stages and provides actionable insights. Highlighting the bells and whistles has its time and place, but if you are unable to identify how you can use this product in your environment to resolve issues and maximize user experience, then I've failed. So today we are going to lead out with the real life use case, followed by a demo of Flowmon ADS delivered by Pavel. We will then circle back to provide a brief Flowmon technical overview. Now, we do encourage you to place all of your questions in the Q&A box during the presentation, as we will be answering them live at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and made available to you for on-demand access following the presentation. So now that we understand the lay of the land, let's dig in here. Okay, so let me give you kind of a high-level overview of the specific scenario by which we are basing this use case on. So as you kind of heard me mention earlier, this is primarily focused on a supply chain compromise. So the attack scenario consists of a specific help desk system vendor that was targeted and breached, with an attacker managing to embed malicious code in the help desk system's source code base. As a result, the latest product software was released with a backdoor, as you would imagine, giving the attacker remote access to the system without permission. We have a kind of topology here breaking down the actors involved in this specific use case, and you'll see kind of how they correlate to some of the event identification in Flowmon as we kind of go through the various steps. But ultimately, it's important to understand that this attacker's objective primarily is to steal company data via data exfiltration and disrupt company operations, right? And as you would imagine, having gained malicious access to the help desk system source code base, they have an ability or a caveat by which they can kind of um, piggyback off of the software updates that are deployed across the help desk system's customer base in order to infect as many machines as possible, right? So with that said, let's dive right in and show you kind of how this grows into an issue here. So the first step, or the first kind of approach that an attacker is going to take is reconnaissance, right? They have to do their homework and identify more so how effective their backdoor was in exposing some of these devices that are internet accessible, right? And so in this case, the attacker leverages Nmap on port 443 to scan the internet for a potentially vulnerable help desk system, considering, of course, that help desk system has been updated. With that said, you can tell here by the screenshot that we gain a ton of information here. Now, uh, we will look at how this is viewed in Flowmon, and I will kind of highlight that this is a very difficult phase with respect to identifying false positive versus information that is key, right? Where we have an internet accessible server here, and so the communications even seen by Flowmon, and we'll see that in just a moment, are going to contain public IP addresses, right? And as you would imagine, anything exposed to the internet is going to constantly be being scanned and hit by things. But nevertheless, it doesn't make it any less important. However, I do want to highlight the fact that it becomes very easy to kind of mitigate against false positive, as well as to determine whether or not this information is information that you care about. But moving along here with the reconnaissance process, the attacker uses curl to analyze specific HTTP headers, and the attacker can confirm the presence of the vulnerable help desk system update or software that they intend to target, right? And we can see here on the screen the various HTTP headers that we can leverage to identify the vulnerability of a help desk system or any server really in the that's internet accessible, right? And so um, we move into initial access, right? The kind of first step after reconnaissance is done that an attacker takes to gain access to your network, right? So by accessing a specific URL, the attacker triggers a web shell they previously implanted into the application code that has now been widely deployed. So the reverse web shell binary is actually owned by root and therefore runs under root permissions. And that's going to really kind of come into play as this attack progresses, and you'll see why it was important to gain that access, and why an attacker would want to ultimately gain that access. So in this case, right, the attacker leveraged Interpreter's reverse shell from the Metasploit framework, and along with it has gained access to the Interpreter's features, such as a keylogger and various backdoor features, right? And with root permissions and access to the internal server, the attacker has all they need to begin inflicting some serious damage. And you can kind of see here from the actual screenshot, the attacker has access in Ubuntu server running the help desk system via reverse shell, again with root permissions. So let's take our first break from the attack vector, and we're going to do this a few times before the demo today, because I want to kind of highlight as we progress through this process how Flowmon is going to identify or provide those network detection and response optics that are going to be key to identifying issues in their infancy, right? And that's ultimately the goal, right? So at the reconnaissance stage, right, the attacker leveraged Nmap to conduct horizontal TCP scans, which is recognized by Flowmon as shown here via the screenshot. Furthermore, Flowmon provides forensic evidence such as which IPs were scanned and how many attempts were responded to as opposed to how many attempts were not responded to. Now, why is it important to see that, right? Ultimately, as an attack progresses, or really any event that's triggered in an environment, is only as valuable as its deep level insights or insights to how successful that trajectory was. In this case, in the sense of a TCP scan, or any real horizontal network scan, it's important to understand how many of your resources in the environment were responding, right? So now, you know you can kind of use this information, and I kind of highlighted before that this is, at this point, this is public facing. We're probably in a DMZ monitoring, and we're seeing public IP speak. And ultimately speaking, from a SecOps perspective, you're going to look at this and say, all right, well, great, but I'm seeing this all day long, right? So I mean, you take all this information, you put it together. What it can really help you do is identify maybe specifically which applications you have publicly accessible, as well as whether or not those applications should be publicly accessible or need to be. And then, of course, tying down those ports by which they're listening, ensuring that only the ports required is essential, right, in a deployment. And so again, seeing the event detail highlighting how many attempts were responded to as opposed to not responded to is key kind of information in leveraging this event. So in addition, we talked through and showed how the attacker gained initial access. And so from the Flowmon perspective, once the attacker begins communicating with the target help desk system, Flowmon's reputational database is leveraged to outline communications to your network resources from a known malicious IP, right? So Flowmon is going to have a reputational database built into the product, managed by us, where you are going to enable or be able to see whether any known malicious IPs, known command and control centers, and so on and so forth, are communicating with your network, right? And again, right, this is public IPs communications on the DMZ, and things don't necessarily get more severe until those kind of communications start to occur in your inside network. But again, can also tell you how to structure things a little differently, right? All right, so let's dive back in. And now we're at the discovery phase. And you can see that the attacker is beginning to do their homework. So the attacker is using Meterpreter to establish more interactive reverse shells, because why depend on one when you can have many? And just because an attacker is an attacker doesn't mean they don't understand the benefits of redundant architectures. But with that said, the attacker then uses tools they've downloaded into the server to identify the internal IP address of the machine and its net mask, right? So now this is where things begin to elevate into all right, well, I see this all day kind of thing. Maybe I can ignore it. Maybe I can ignore it, to a situation where you cannot ignore this, right? That external actor is doing internal scans to get a lay of the land of your internal networks where all of your intellectual property resides. And this is a major issue. And we'll look at that from the Flowmon perspective in just a moment. Moving along, or rather taking their discovery to the next step, is the vertical scan, right? So the attacker is enumerating devices in the environment in order to lay out the IP address local to the server's network. And in this case, the attacker is using ARP scan, as you can kind of see here in the slide deck. Okay, sorry. So using TCP SYN scans, the attacker discovers available services and system fingerprints for each active IP, right? So there's the step in which we're actually identifying the active IPs on the subnet. And then again, we kind of go into the discovery slash reconnaissance phase where this attacker is trying to identify what services you have running and what services can ultimately be exploited, right? Which is a kind of key part to the process here. And then credential access, right? So there are various methods by which these attackers can once they have access or elevated access to an environment, can start to try to gain access to passwords, right? So password spraying, key loggers, things of that sort. In this case, the attacker is using password spraying in order to attempt to gain access to a subset of the servers that are deployed within the network. In this case, some Linux servers over SSH. Um, Thankfully, well, I mean, this is a kind of attack vector, right? But with that said, the attacker is unsuccessful at gaining access to SSH. So they kind of move on to bigger and better things and start to think about exploiting known vulnerabilities, right? As you would imagine. And so the lateral movement of such kind of begins or can kind of begin to lay things out, right? And so the attacker's exploiting here, laterally moving through your environment, knowing the IP, knowing the lay of the land. The attacker is leveraging or decided to leverage the DNS cigarette vulnerability to circumvent authentication and elevate their privileges to the highest level, as if root wasn't enough, right? But with that said, they now have key privileges in the environment, right? And so with those privileges, the attacker is going to go ahead and disable on this Windows server that it's on now here. It's going to disable Windows Defender to prevent security alerts, and so that it can download files right onto the appliance, right? So you can see this kind of in the various phases, right, where the commands go from disabling Windows Defender to downloading Interpreter for Windows and running that specific download, right? And now again, what this attacker is doing is equipping the devices that it's exfiltrated, or rather that it's infiltrated, to kind of run its programs or run its functionality to gain either deeper insight into the environment or start its threat. Okay, so using Meterpreter, the attacker opens a reverse web shell on the Windows server, right? Kind of the same approach that it took to the Linux server, or rather to uh, the initial kind of um, infiltration, right? So with that said, from this point, running from the web shell point, we'll stop here, and I want to circle back again to Flowmon, right? So let's pause again and have a look at how Flowmon highlights specifically the points of compromise and persistency, right? Okay. So as soon as the attacker starts their process of environment discovery, where we kind of led off in this second part here, Flowmon identifies and highlights internal network virtual TCP SYN scanning and ARP scanning using scans, or rather using the scans Flowmon behavioral based method, right? So Flowmon and we'll go through this a little later in the technical deep dive, but Flowmon is comprised of a multitude of different methods by which we can kind of identify early attacks in their infancy. This case, scans method that you see here on the screen is a behavioral based method, right? Now, you can pretty much forget what I said in the beginning about CCP scans having the potential to be ignored. Now this is serious, right? We are scanning in your internal network. This is almost always going to be a problem again, unless you guys are doing something in your networks to trigger these scans. But with that said, you see the multiple TCP scans across multiple ports here. But in addition to TCP, you see ARP scanning, right? So you have your standard approach to vertical and horizontal scanning that's occurring in the environment, right? And this is essential to call out. As we also mentioned before, when the attacker begins a password spraying. So the password spraying attempt the attacker made in order to try to gain SSH access is identified, though it was unsuccessful, right? It's identified by Flowmon's machine learning based algorithms or methods, which are able to identify password guessing within a network. In this case, the method is a dictionary attack, and the sub method is the SSH protocol, right? So the attacker specifically here is leveraging SSH, is doing their password spraying. And again, you see the kind of same story where we break down the type, the sub method, provide you that the details around the specific event, and we'll go more into details with this when we go into our demo later. But you can see also your success, right? And that success is really going to kind of speak volumes to the SecOps engineer who's trying to mitigate this issue, right? And then, of course, lateral movement, right? So this event trigger highlights Flowmon's ability to not only leverage signatureless behavioral methods, but to also generate signature-based events, right? So we have the ability to generate IDS, IPS signature-based events in line with the signature-less kind of behavioral-based methods that we're kind of triggering, right? And the idea here again is just to provide you all of the event evidence that you need to not only understand the extent of an attack in your network, but to mitigate it and mitigate it effectively, right? So we just want to give you all the information that we possibly can to make this experience as as good as possible when your when your network's under attack. But with that said, as you can see on the screen, when the attacker leveraged the DNS SIGRED vulnerability to gain system privileges, its activity triggered the Flowmon SIGRED behavioral pattern submethod, right? That's your signature list, as well as the possible Windows DNS integer overflow exploit signature, your signature based trigger. Okay, back on the attack vector, right? So we're back with the attacker. We're kind of switching sides here to a little protagonist, antagonist kind of conversation. So with that said, moving along, the attacker decides it's time to begin data collection, right? The attacker starts to transfer data from the Windows server to the Ubuntu server that is running the help desk application, right? So lateral movement in data inside the environment from one infiltrated device to the other. They then decide to, of course, exfiltrate that data to the attacks machine, to the attacker's public machine, right, outside of the network by using netcat to camouflage traffic as DNS queries, right? And data exfiltration is primarily going to be leveraging either abilities or vulnerabilities in other protocols to get that data out, right? So the idea is to begin to exfiltrate that data without triggering any alarms or getting you to stop the exfiltration. So whether it's DNS tunneling via camouflage and queries, or ICMP anomalies with large payload, right? There's multiple approaches to exfiltrating that data, right? But with that said, this attacker leverages DNS tunneling and netcat to camouflage this exfiltration of data. So finally, after it has, it's kind of met its first goal that or objective that we discussed earlier of exfiltrating key data, it wants to kind of start um, impacting business operations, right? So with that said, the attacker then exfiltrates that. Uh, sorry, a little further. So sorry. So finally, the attacker exploits the NTFS vulnerability to corrupt the Windows Server file system, causing it to reboot. Now that the service file system is corrupted, of course, it's not going to boot back up, but it's going to constantly be trying to boot or repair itself. But the idea here, right, is that the services that are sitting on that appliance are no longer accessible, right? And ultimately, the attacker has achieved its goal of impacting or exfiltrating key data and impacting company operations, right? With where you have servers that are running key operations or key services and applications, downtime is typically pretty detrimental, right? So, of course, mission accomplished, right? Now, let's take a look again one last time here at how Flowmon was able to provide visibility into the connection and the exfiltration that just took place in the environment. So, using our behavioral based methods, right, Flowmon is able to identify the high transfer between the Windows and Ubuntu server based on a large amount of data transferred in such a short period of time, right? And now these behavioral based methods, right, are leveraging kind of preset intervals or data structure, data amounts with respect to what's being transferred in a short period of time. This is all customizable, right? So first off, the product will use adaptive baselining and monitoring your environment for a duration of time so that it can provide the kind of AI approach to these behavioral methods. However, if you have a great lay of the land and understand what is normal, what's not normal, then you can kind of preset these values. But with that said, this Windows server and this Ubuntu server were not communicating in line with what the transfer with respect to the exfiltrated data would have triggered, right? So you get a high transfer event. And again, we detail this out, right, so that you can kind of read through this and determine whether or not it's a false positive or is an issue, right? But with that said, we've gone through a multitude of events, and these events in conjunction over a period of time are certainly going to tell their own story, right? So if you see just a high transfer out of nowhere and nothing else correlating, then obviously maybe it's not a problem, right? But with that said, moving along, so with respect to this slide, it's the exfiltration, right? We're going to begin to highlight what we can do here from that perspective. So Flowmon ADS is able to detect the attacker using that non-standard protocol to move data, right? Using DNS to exfiltrate data, as it can identify when a device exceeds the user-defined threshold with data, via DNS transfer data, right? So obviously speaking, DNS is going to transfer a certain amount of data. However, if you're exfiltrating a large amount of data outside of your network via DNS, we're going to call attention to that kind of thing, and that's typically not going to be non-malicious in nature, right? So, though at this point the damage is done, right, Flowmon ADS methods can be leveraged to notify you when specific services become unavailable, right, based on the lack of response to connection requests, based on connection rejections that Flowmon sees in the environment to client requests. We're going to begin to notify you, right? And sometimes this is a key indicator to something's wrong in the environment. Not always, or rather, not always at the result of an attack, but it's important to kind of highlight how in this case, of course, from a SecOps perspective or a NetOps perspective, you want to know right away when this service is down, right? But it also highlights how Flowmon ADS can contribute to network operations as opposed to security operations, in that we're identifying all network-based anomalous behavior, right? So whether it's an intrusion or something misconfigured in an environment or a network going array, we're going to be able to call attention to it, right? And this is kind of how the story gets to the final point, of course, of this attack. But I did want to highlight the value from a NetOps perspective here as well. So together we walk through the stages of this supply chain compromise attack, and I hope that, if not as a whole, this use case really defines something that is valuable to you, but at least from, or rather at a minimum, the individual events and the screenshots into what you actually get to see was proven as valuable for you, right? Ultimately, again, we want to position this product to meet the use cases that you each individually have, and that's why we kind of let out with these specific use cases, right? So, taking things a step further, I do want to highlight, right, that Flowmon organizes all of the events we discussed into the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'll discuss a little more about this, and Pavel will go deeper into this as well. But the whole goal here is giving you visibility into how events correlate to the different stages of an attack, right? Of course, as you would imagine, we also provide the ability to view these events on a timeline by event type, so that mapping out an attack over a period of time is made streamlined. And so with that, not to go too deep, because I know Pavel is going to show you this live, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Pavel for a demo of Flowmon ADS in action to provide insights into how SecOps engineers can navigate this powerful tool. So Pavel?
Thanks, Frank. So, hi everyone. I will give you a brief live demo of the use case that you have seen in the deck. We're starting on a dashboard where you can see the MITRE ATT&CK framework metrics. So the activity is organized according to techniques and individual tactics that are being leveraged during the whole attack. There is also another alternative view on those events with the level of criticality assigned according to our own interpretation of the network activity. So we have seen very interesting technique how the attacker get data out of the network environment. So it's this exfiltration over alternative protocol. So let's do a deep dive into this specific event. So from the dashboard, now I'm in the anomaly detection system user interface. So that's the user interface that security analyst will use to deep dive into individual events and run his investigations. So we can see a brief overview, but I really want to go into details. So in an even detail, I do have an human readable and understandable interpreted situation. I understand that in this case, it's an anomaly of a DNS protocol. It's a high amount of TCP traffic that may be either DNS zone transfer between DNS servers, or it may be a malicious activity like data exfiltration. And as we can see, 310 megabytes of data uploaded to the internet to this destination IP, which is actually our attacker. The activity is classified according to MITRE ATT&CK framework, as we discussed, and you have at hand all the extracted details. But you can go deeper. It doesn't end here. You can go for something we call event evidence. So now I'm actually loading the individual network sessions, individual network metadata about the traffic that actually caused this event to be detected. So these are these two flows that actually triggered the detection. And there is also an alternative view how you can investigate what is going on. You can do event visualization. And when you do this, you will actually see an interactive map of all the IPs involved in that specific event. But you can also pivot from here and look, okay, so this device communicated to this external suspicious IP, show me what's more going on. And what you will see here is this is our data transfer to the outside internet. This is the upload. And here you will see the data transfer over the Samba protocol. So basically Windows sharing. So this is the Windows server transferring the data to the Ubuntu server with helpdesk application and then exfiltrated outside of the network. So it's very well documented, the activity that happened in the network. You can still go even deeper. Let me demonstrate that on the another detection that we'll have here. I'll take this ICMP anomaly. So depending on how you configure the system, you can get true forensic data, meaning full packet traces. So I didn't want to do this. I wanted to do this, even details. And here is this section called traffic records. So you actually have available full packet traces of that specific traffic that triggered the detection, plus kind of an window when the event is triggered for, let's say, 5-10 minutes, what is then going on. And how this is possible, Frank will explain in the next section, where we will deep dive deeper into how it technically works. So handing over back to you, Frank.
All right. Thank you very much, Pavel. Okay, so let's dig back into that Flowmon technical overview that I mentioned earlier, or that I mentioned at the beginning in our introduction. We want to give you a kind of high-level understanding of how it works and what Flowmon has to offer, right? So first off, it's really important to understand that I know we're focusing today on network detection and response, and specifically security. But Flowmon actually, or the product portfolio for Flowmon, actually provides value in network performance monitoring and diagnostics, as well as application performance monitoring. So you have a single tool that's going to contribute value and promote operational synergy to NetOps teams, SecOps teams, and app teams. Right, so let's talk about how it works, right? Because this is really going to highlight how we do what we do, as well as how we do what we do so well. But with that said, Flowmon, if it wasn't given away in the name of the product set, is completely flow-based. And for those on the call who don't understand what flow is essentially network metadata of actual packets that are traversing your environment, right? So I like to use the representation of flow versus packet as packet being the actual object and flow being a image of that object, right? But with that said, across the top of our screen here, we see multiple flow sources that are available to us, right? So cloud platforms natively have the ability to not only generate flow via flow logs, but some of these platforms like Google Cloud and AWS provide things like V-tapping and mirroring traffic to a probe, right? And so Flowmon itself, all of our appliances are can be deployed hardware, virtual, or cloud. And of course, we can have all of these activities or the responsibilities that these appliances have kind of be prevalent in each of those platforms. But with that said, you also see here routers and switches. right? So Flow has been around for a very long time, and routers and switches generically have the feature built in by which they can generate flow. Now, this flow is typically significantly sampled, just as flow logs in a cloud platform are significantly sampled, and they're not enriched, right? It's going to be some standard format of flow. And then we have our load master product, which is an application delivery controller. And this product has the ability, or has a bit of a kind of lightweight probe built into it, so that it can generate flow for communications that are traversing the application delivery controller. Of course, a ADC or load balancer is a really great vantage point for monitoring traffic in your environment. And then our Flowmon probe, or as I'd like to call it, the secret sauce, right? So our Flowmon probe is the most powerful net flow generator on the market today. And what it essentially has the ability to do is connect to your environment via, VTAPs, tap span monitoring port, um, in order to gain visibility into raw packet data. Right? And with that visibility, what we do is we generate enriched flow by way of deep packet inspection. Right? So we do deep packet inspection on a multitude of popular protocols, some of which are SIP, DNS, HTTP, TLS, DHCP, right? And we take out specific attributes of those protocols. And then with those attributes, we generate enriched flow in IPFix format. We can support every flavor of flow, but the flow that we actually generate from our probe being most enriched would be IPFix. In addition to enriching that flow, we are keeping one-for-one communication, so we're not sampling or don't have to sample. And then all of that flow resides then on our collector, right? So our Flowmon collector is where all of the reporting is done, all of the data analysis, where our modules live and reside. And as a standard, you're going to get on our collect network visibility and troubleshooting via Flowmon Monitoring Center. And what that's going to provide you is with the ability to not only monitor things from a dashboards and reports perspective, but to be able to deep dive into the traffic and run specific analysis against traffic quickly, of course, because Flow is so much more lightweight than Packet is, right? And with that said, across the bottom of the screen here, you see that we have for the segment network detection and response, the Flowmon anomaly detection system that we just discussed. And then we have full packet capture or an analysis covered by Flowmon Packet Investigator. And then, of course, from the application performance monitoring perspective, Flowmon Application Performance Monitor. Um, I do want to highlight Flowmon Packet Investigator for a second, right? So Pavel mentioned earlier, we brought up an anomaly detection system, a specific event, and with that event, you saw associated traffic records. Now, I started this slide by saying we are completely flow-based, and that might confuse some people with respect to why I'm mentioning packet. All right, so remember though, right, our Flowmon probe has visibility into the actual package traversing a network interface. Now, though we don't store those packets, for the use cases in which they are deemed important, we can leverage them, right? So it is said, right, that 80% of the time, traditional flow is good enough for root cause analysis, right? However, we take that number with our flow enrichment and flow generated through Flowmon to about 95%, right? So for the 5% of the time where you need packet visibility, we provide Flowmon Packet Investigator, right? Now, of course, I don't think 5% is enough to justify storing packet. However, it is still key visibility that we feel that our customers should have access to. And so from the anomaly detection system perspective, right? Essentially what we can do is we can tell the collector, hey, if a certain method is triggered, right? Pavel used the example of ICMP anomaly large payload, right? If you see large payload going via ICMP in the environment, we want you to run a packet capture. Why? Because it's essential to figure out what data is being exfiltrated from a network. Do I even care about the ransomware attack? Did they exfiltrate anything valuable to me, right? And gaining insights into that kind of revolves around leveraging all of these modules, right? So you have your event, the associated flows that you're going to get from Flowmon Monitoring Sensor, and then of course the packet capture that you get from Flowmon Packet Investigator. I do want to also highlight that if you're troubleshooting a dynamic issue where it's very hard to kind of capture, you can leverage the collector in Flowmon Packet Investigator to say, for example, hey, if client A speaks to server B over this protocol within this time window, run a packet capture. And the idea there, of course, is the engineer gets to come in the morning to all the packet captures that it needs to do their job, right? So moving along here, I do want to highlight quickly the various methods from a flow perspective, and with this diagram or this topology here, how we can kind of ingest flow, right? So you have, like I mentioned before, the ability to deploy a collector in a cloud environment, and there's two approaches to monitoring in a cloud environment, right? So, for example, Azure has decommissioned their network mirroring, or VTAP rather, and so they do support still Azure Flow logs. So what we can do is we can ingest those Azure native flow logs as well as the AWS and Google Cloud native flow logs into our collector, store them, run analysis against them, and provide you with the visibility that you need in a centralized view. Furthermore, AWS and Google Cloud still support mirroring within their environments. And so we can actually deploy a virtual probe, right, in the cloud environment to ingest those mirrored packets and then generate, again, enriched flow from those mirrored packets and send them to the collector. So then for your on-prem story, of course, we can be deployed virtually as well as hardware, right? And depending on the monitoring point, we may do a bit of both for a hybrid or distributed architecture environment. But with that said, you can deploy your hardware virtual probes to uh, connect to a switch, for example, via a monitoring port, a tap, inline tap, or span port. And then ultimately, we're going to generate from the raw packet visibility, we'll generate enriched flow and send it to the collector. And then, of course, here all the way on the right, you have a router, right? We want to highlight, of course, that depending on your deployment needs, that it may be fruitful to be able to ingest flow from a third-party product already generating it in your environment, and we can certainly do that, right? So you have that kind of router highlighting that relationship. Um, but yeah, that's the kind of breakdown of how things can flow with respect to how we can ingest that flow and how things work for us. With that said, kind of circling back, I want to talk to you a bit more about the MITRE attack framework and why it's even important, right? So Pavel went into and showed you in the UI what it looks like, right? But it's also very important to understand that, in a production environment, you're going to see more often than not a lot of events triggering, right? And so the question in your head, first off, is this product finely tuned or tuned against false positives greatly enough that I'm looking at things that are actually important, right? And once we get past that, right? And I still have a ton of events. So how do I kind of correlate or coordinate all of these events, right? So now the Matter Tab framework provides the ability to organize those events, right? Putting things in their own, virtual file cabinet of sorts with respect to how important something is, right? So we're going to take specific events and we're going to categorize them as discovery, as exploits, as data collection, as command and control. And this organization makes really managing the product very streamlined. And that's ultimately the idea, right? We want to provide you with the ability to monitor this product and not need to be a security extraordinaire, right? To have your SecOps engineers be able to leverage the product and easily quickly gain insights to what's going on inside of your environment from a security and a network perspective. So all that we kind of discussed here with respect to ADS, or rather Flowmon, this slide really kind of highlights the nature in which ADS operates, right? So you have your input data, your network telemetry, your enriched flows, the reputational database feeds that I mentioned that we support as well, your IDS signature-based signatures, and of course full packet data, all feeding a multitude of algorithms, right, on ADS, right? So ADS is leveraging machine learning, adaptive baselining, user behavior analysis, heuristics, reputational databases, and of course signatures, to provide you with key visibility into what's going on, right? Ultimately, this is supposed to be taking the lens off of your network so that you can gain insights into specifically what is happening and whether or not specific intrusions have gotten past your perimeter security devices, your endpoint security devices, right? Considering, of course, we're connected to your network, right? We're connected to the key vantage point, oftentimes the single source of truth, right? To identify, whether or not your intellectual property is vulnerable, right? So the results are, of course, these verbose events, your relevant telemetry, so the flows that are associated with those events, your forensically captured data and analysis. Of course, we're monitoring for CVE vulnerabilities and referring to those CVEs, right? So it may, again, just doing something as simple as that is going to give you the ability to really understand what's happening in the environment. And then your automated response, right? So that's a key point. We were covering here network detection and response, right? So ideally, what you want to be able to do is obviously detect all this, but from in an automated perspective, we have the ability, and we have a large library of integrations that we support, where you can actually go ahead and gain insights into how we've developed integrations with partners or other vendors in the environment. So, for example, we can have Flowmon identify a security anomaly in your environment and then speak directly to your firewall and quarantine that device, so that when you get to when you get to work in the morning, you can kind of just see all the events and emails associated to that specific event, as well as know or be rest assured that it was handled through your through the automated responsibilities of Flowmon. So, summing everything up, right? We want to provide you with the right tools, the right methods, and the right framework, as well as the right information to give you that deep level forensic insight into your network, to deliver management of that aspect in an easy way. And I think that we really have done that with the Flowmon product set as a whole, as well as for the individual Flowmon software modules, today being ADS or anomaly detection system. And we hope you certainly feel the same. So, with that said, we really appreciate you guys tuning in and joining us for this presentation. We hope that we've articulated a value. We hope that the use case was interesting enough or could be partially or wholly pertinent to your environment. But with that said, we're going to go ahead and take some time to answer some questions here today. So if you haven't typed your questions in just yet, feel free to throw them in the chat. There's a few that I have here to go through, and we'll do that now. But again, if you have any now, feel free to throw them right in the chat. So let me just pull this over here. Okay. So, the first question here is, how does Progress have an online real demo available to show its customers, or to enable us to show it to our customers? And the answer is absolutely, right? So, via our website, or actually one of the attachments in this Bright Talk, I think we added the form, or if not the link to our website page, where you can actually share a little information and gain credential access to our publicly accessible demo environment, right? So you can go ahead and kind of kick the tires a bit, as well as you can show value from that demo environment to your customers, if that is what you intend to do. Another question we have here is, can you tell us what are the typical symptoms or clues in a malware attack? What clues should we watch for in Flowmon? So I want to, I guess, with this question, let me highlight kind of the whole approach to why we started this use case discussion, from initial access all the way to exploitation and exfiltration, and ultimately to interrupting network operations. Right. The idea here is you should be addressing issue mitigation or issue awareness at its root, right? So identifying a security issue at its infancy is key. The TCP scans, the ARP scans, right, all the way up into the communications that have triggered our reputational database, the blacklists, right? The lateral transfers between your Windows and your Ubuntu server, your high transfer rates, your behavioral based anomalies, right? It's key to kind of look at things from that perspective, because of course you want to gain the ability to block this attack before it actually metastasizes, right? So with that said, Pavel, I'm going to ask you, did I miss anything there? Any additional points on that question?
Yeah, I hope I finally unmuted myself.
You are, yes,
Uh,
you are.
so I think you summarized it well. These activities of attackers or malware-infected machines, they leave a footprint in the network, and it's about transforming that footprint into an actionable intelligence. So you should watch for attacks against network services, especially in the internal environment. There's absolutely no legitimate reason for a server starting to attack other servers around him on, like, Windows Remote Desktop Protocol or on SSH protocol. There is absolutely no reason for your PCs to contact malicious hosts. Recently, we have expanded the set of capabilities with an AI-powered method that is able to recognize communication to potentially malicious domain based on lexical analysis of that domain, because these random generated domains from domain generation algorithms are usually used as botnet command control centers. And for that, you you don't actually need any knowledge in advance which domains are malicious and which are not, because the system is able to determine from the domain as such that this is most probably malicious. Of course, you will not find all the time only attacks or malware. You will also find some internal users having very weird applications installed on their company PCs. And that's also something you don't want to see in the internal enterprise network, like users running BitTorrent, downloading the data. It's something that you don't really want to see in the internal environment. You don't want to see your users bypassing security measures in the environment using, for example, the onion router, the Tor. So all these things together will help you to better manage and secure your environment.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much. Give me a second here. Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna kind of pick these questions here for you, right? Oh yeah, this is a phenomenal question. So is there any other action other than email to notify users about a potential threat in a network? Absolutely, right? So in addition to SMTP, we do support SNMP, syslog notifications, right? As well as we can offload events and such to a SIM solution in your environment, which will help the kind of notification vector. As well as we have the ability to kind of function around built-in automation, right? So our product is very flexible in scripting and in automating kind of response to specific actions, right? So whether that is a communication with a perimeter security device to block something or notify you by a custom method, we can certainly do that. Pavel, anything to add there?
No, I think you summarized it completely.
Perfect. Okay. And does Progress provide some templates out of the box, or do I have to configure all by myself? Absolutely, we provide templates for your dashboard, your widgets, for your with respect to ADS, we have a configuration wizard that'll kind of assist you to deploy the product. One of our approaches is, being very easy to use and quick to deploy, right? So, and I don't want to kind of highlight the fact that though we have a template library, you're not limited by which the extent that you can configure things on your own, right? So your dashboards and widgets can be self-configured. You can edit the ones that we deploy for you via our library, but we absolutely have that ability to provide you with templates out of the box so that you can kind of hit the ground running. Another question here in the chat: do you get any benefit from the What's Up Gold NetFlow add-on if you have Flowmon? From the NetFlow add-on specifically, no, right? So NetFlow Traffic Analyzer from What's Up Gold is a very standardized approach to Flowmon monitoring. I'm sorry, to flow-based monitoring. It is very useful and it can certainly be very useful in the environment. However, Flowmon being specifically focused on flow generation and enrichment is going to provide way deeper insights and a kind of caveat to not having any sampling done inside of your environment. With that said, however, and kind of answering another question here in conjunction, our What's Up Gold product set is within the same product portfolio at Progress as Flowmon is, and because of specifically the focus on application experience, right? So we are building in functionality around the ability for What's Up Gold to kind of integrate and provide a single pane of glass for management of Flowmon through What's Up Gold, and we do have content out there for that as well. But if you're interested, of course, reach out and we'll share that with you. So
Frank, maybe
with that,
if I can
sorry,
jump in
yeah, please,
and give
yeah,
another perspective on this, like if your needs in terms of network traffic monitoring are, I would say, basic. You want to understand bandwidth utilization,
hmm
you want to understand top talkers, you just go with What's Up Gold NetFlow add-on that is designed especially for this radical simplicity, getting this out of the box information with like a minimal tuning. That's it. However,
hmm
if you want to go deeper, if you want to be able to drill down into individual flow level, if you want to be able to troubleshoot operational issues, if you want to go back in time, if you want to have automated anomaly detection, and so on. So it's, you know how it goes. What's Up Gold is IT infrastructure monitoring with I would say,
Mhm.
basic network monitoring capability. Flowmon is an
Yes.
NPMD, network performance monitoring, diagnostics, and network detection response tool. So it's kind of really a different tool.
Absolutely. All right. So, in respect of everybody's time, we're going to wrap up there. If we didn't get to answer your question, we will certainly follow up with you. Again, I just want to thank you for joining. Thank you for taking the time out to stay for this presentation. I hope it was fruitful for you. I hope you identified some key use cases for your environment. And again, reach out to us via our website. We're happy to do demos and really kind of equip you to be successful and partner with you in your success. So, have a really great day, and thank you again for joining.
Thank you. Bye.